You don't really understand what isolation means until you've flown 3 hours north of Anchorage in a single-engine bush plane. No cell service, no roads, no human voices except the pilot's occasional curse as the wind hits crosswise over the mountain ridges. I'd been in rough country before. Fire watch in Denali, moose patrol near Fairbanks. But this post, Tundra Point Ranger Station, was different. The pilot told me, half smiling, half warning, "Most folks don't last a season out here." I just grinned back. I'd been a ranger for over a decade. I knew the rules. Stay calm, stay sharp, respect the land. Out here, you treat the wilderness like an old predator. Quiet, patient, but never asleep. The plane dropped lower, skimming a frozen valley wrapped in pine and fog. Below, I could see the outline of my new home. One weather-worn cabin, a metal fuel tank, and a thin radio antenna leaning like a bent finger. Nothing else for miles. The pilot throttled down, wheels skidding along a patch of frozen gravel that served as a landing strip. The impact rattled every bone in my body. When we stopped, the silence hit me, deep and total. Not city silence, not even forest silence. This was Alaskan silence, the kind that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. He cut the engine and leaned toward me. "Welcome to Tundra Point," he said. "Population 1. I stepped out into air so cold it burned my lungs. The snow here wasn't soft. It was crusted hard, glittering like ground glass. The tree line pressed in from every direction, dark spruce trees standing shoulder to shoulder like watchmen. I watched the pilot unload my duffel and nod toward the cabin. "That's all yours. Old Hank left some supplies behind. You'll find what you need." "Who's Hank?" I asked. "Last ranger before you. Said he was done with the dark." He didn't wait for me to ask what that meant. The plane roared back to life, turned, and vanished into the clouds. Just like that, I was alone. I slung my pack and trudged toward the cabin. The air smelled like pine sap and diesel. The snow gave way under my boots with a crunch that seemed too loud. The building itself looked like it had been standing since statehood. Hand-hewn logs, roof patched with corrugated metal, porch sagging just enough to complain when I stepped up. Inside, the air was still, the kind of stillness that makes your ears ring. There was a small bunk, a potbelly stove, shelves lined with rations, and a wooden desk with an old shortwave radio. The generator outside hummed faintly, giving off that comforting smell of exhaust and oil. I'd been in plenty of ranger stations before, but this one felt different. Not neglected, just watched. There was a mug half filled with hardened coffee, a pack of chewing tobacco, and a faded photograph pinned to the wall. A man in ranger greens beside a snow machine, smiling. Probably Hank. His eyes looked tired even through the faded print. On the desk, beside the logbook, sat an envelope. No seal, no stamp. Just my name written in neat block letters, Ranger Miller. I figured it was standard procedure. Handover notes, emergency channels, local routes. I opened it and found a single sheet of paper, yellowed and soft from being handled too often. Typed at the top were 2 words, "The rules." I frowned. No letterhead, no official Forest Service markings, just a numbered list. I didn't bother reading it yet, probably some orientation checklist. Instead, I set down my gear and did what rangers always do. Inspection. Fuel stock, half a tank. Water line, frozen, but workable. Generator, coughing, but alive. Wildlife log, blank since midwinter. Everything normal, routine, the way I liked it. By late afternoon, the light began to fade. You'd think the nights in Alaska come on slow, but they don't. They fall. The sky goes from gold to blue to black in a matter of minutes. I stood on the porch, sipping stale coffee from a thermos, and watched the forest turn into silhouettes. The quiet was so complete it felt unnatural. No birds, no wind. Not even the usual groan of trees shifting under frost. Then, just as the sun disappeared behind the ridge, Something echoed from the far woods, a sound like a tree splitting, deep and sharp. I've heard wood break before, but this had a rhythm. 3 short cracks. A pause. Then silence again. I stayed on the porch for a while, waiting for another sound, but nothing came. The air was getting colder, the shadows longer. I went back inside and latched the door, more out of habit than fear. When I finally sat down to log my arrival, my eyes drifted to that envelope again. It was still sitting on the desk, catching the edge of the lamplight. I opened it this time. The first line read, "Rule 1, lock every door by sundown." I chuckled under my breath. Guess I already passed the first test. I folded the note, slid it back into the envelope, and tossed it into the drawer. But as I turned off the lamp, I caught something faint through the window. Movement between the trees. Could have been the wind. Could have been nothing. Still, for the first time that night, I felt a small, cold pulse of unease at the base of my neck. Alaska has a way of reminding you, you're never really alone out here. The next morning broke like most Alaskan dawns do. Slow, gray, and soundless. The frost on the window looked like veins under glass, and the air inside the cabin was so cold my breath hung above me like fog. I fired up the stove, added a few chunks of spruce from the pile outside, and watched the metal glow orange. The smell of smoke mixed with the scent of damp wood and diesel from the generator. The kind of smell that never leaves your clothes out here. I made my first pot of coffee, thick and bitter, poured it into the old mug the last ranger had left behind, and sat at the desk. That's when I noticed it again. That envelope marked rules. I hadn't touched it since last night. For a moment, I just stared at it. The edges had curled from the stove's heat, and it looked older than it had before. The typewriter ink wasn't black. It was brown, the color of something written a long time ago. I slid the paper out and read it properly this time. The next morning broke like most Alaskan dawns do, slow, gray, and soundless. The frost on the window looked like veins under glass, and the air inside the cabin was so cold my breath hung above me like fog. I fired up the stove, added a few chunks of spruce from the pile outside, and watched the metal glow orange. The smell of smoke mixed with the scent of damp wood and diesel from the generator, the kind of smell that never leaves your clothes out here. I made my first pot of coffee, thick and bitter, poured it into the old mug the last ranger had left behind, and sat at the desk. That's when I noticed it again. That envelope marked rules. I hadn't touched it since last night. For a moment, I just stared at it. The edges had curled from the stove's heat, and it looked older than it had before. The typewriter ink wasn't black. It was brown, the color of something written a long time ago. I slid the paper out and read it properly this time. The rules. 1. Lock every door by sundown. 2. If you hear someone knocking after midnight, don't answer. 3. Never follow the lights beyond the tree line. 4. Check the radio at 3 o'clock a.m., not before, not after. 5. If you see footprints that circle the cabin twice, leave immediately. 6. The moose aren't always moose. 7. Keep 1 bullet for yourself. 8. Burn anything that whispers. 9. Never, ever look in the window when you hear crying. I let out a short laugh, the kind you make when something doesn't feel right, but you don't want to admit it. Must have been Hank's idea of humor, I muttered. Still, the paper didn't read like a joke. It read like a confession. The phrasing wasn't official. No ranger jargon, no survival tips. It was personal. The kind of thing someone writes after they've seen something. I turned the paper over, half expecting a signature. Nothing. Just faint indentations on the back, like someone had written another note beneath it, then torn the page away. I shoved it back in the envelope, but it stayed in my mind all morning. After breakfast, I did my rounds. The standard stuff: fuel levels, radio check, perimeter walk. The snow had drifted up past my knees in some places, untouched except for a few fox tracks leading off toward the creek. The stillness was unreal. No birds, no wind, Even the generator outside seemed quieter today, like it didn't want to disturb whatever owned the silence. Inside, I unpacked my gear: rifle, field notebook, flares, maps, first aid kit. Everything you'd expect for a solo assignment. It felt routine enough that I almost forgot the strange unease from the night before. But when I opened the logbook, I realized something was wrong. The last entry was dated January 14th, 2018. That was 6 years ago. The handwriting, shaky, hurried, read, "Heard the knocking again. 3rd night in a row. Can't tell if it's in my head. Leaving soon." No signature, just that line. I sat back in my chair, rubbing my temple. Maybe headquarters forgot to send an updated logbook. Happens. But the word stuck with me. Heard the knocking again. Later that afternoon, I took a snowmobile down the ridge to check the northern boundary markers. The machine coughed and sputtered. The fuel line probably half frozen, but it held. The deeper I went into the trees, the stranger the forest felt. Alaska's woods are old, older than the maps. The pines here grow close, their trunks black with age and moss that hangs like wet hair. Even the sound of the engine didn't carry far. It just dissolved into the air, like the forest swallowed it whole. Halfway through the run, I saw something that made me ease off the throttle. A wooden sign nailed to a tree, its paint long faded. All I could make out was one word: stay. No arrow, no number, no marking. Just that word. It wasn't on any of my survey maps. By the time I got back, the sun was already dropping. Fast. I radioed in my check-in to dispatch, standard procedure. Static crackled, and a woman's voice came through faintly. "Copy that, Tundra Point. You're our only active ranger this season. Keep your logs daily." Then a pause. "You still using that old cabin?" "Yeah. Why?" I asked. She hesitated. "Nothing. Just thought they'd condemned it." The line cut out. I stared at the radio for a while, waiting for it to reconnect. It didn't. By dusk, I was back inside, warming my hands over the stove. The woods outside were turning black again. I kept glancing toward the door, then to that envelope on the desk. The rational part of me, the trained ranger, said it was nonsense. Old superstition, maybe a prank from the last guy to keep rookies on edge. But another part of me, the one that had lived long enough in the wild to know when something's off, whispered otherwise. The generator flickered once. The lamp dimmed. And from somewhere out in the distance, between the trees, came a sound. Not loud, not close. Just a single, heavy thump. Like something large taking one deliberate step in the snow. I reached for the rifle before I even realized it. Then I remembered Rule 1. Lock every door by sundown. The handle clicked into place, and that was the first time I caught myself checking the clock. He showed up around noon, the sound of a snowmobile breaking the silence like a chainsaw through glass. At first I thought it was a supply drop, but the machine wasn't hauling crates. It was just one man, hunched against the wind, wearing an oil-stained parka and mirrored goggles. He slowed as he reached the clearing, cut the engine, and let the quiet swallow us both again. He pulled the goggles down, and I finally saw his face. Leathered skin, gray beard, eyes the color of river ice. Hank, the last ranger. He looked older than the photograph on the cabin wall. Thinner, too, like the forest had been feeding on him for years. "Figured I'd find someone up here by now," he said, voice rough, like he hadn't used it in a while. "You the new hand they sent?" "Yeah," I said. "Ranger Miller." I offered my glove. He didn't shake it. Instead, he looked past me, scanning the cabin, the tree line, the sky, the way a man does when he's checking for something that doesn't want to be seen. "Place looks about the same," he muttered. "Generator still coughing?" "Like a smoker on his last breath," I said. That got the first hint of a smile out of him, but it didn't last. He walked to the porch steps, crouched down, and brushed away some snow. There were faint marks in the wood, claw-like scratches, uneven and deep. I hadn't noticed them before. "You got the list yet?" he asked suddenly. "The what?" "The list," he said again, straightening up. "In the envelope." I hesitated. "Yeah, 9 rules. Cute joke." Hank's eyes locked on mine, sharp, cold, steady. "It's not a joke, kid." His voice had no humor left in it. Just something brittle, like fear that had been sanded down over time. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Read it again. Real slow this time. Every word matters." I laughed it off, but he didn't join me. "What's with the rules, anyway?" I asked. "Some local folklore?" Hank looked out toward the woods. The wind shifted, brushing through the pines like breath through teeth. "They're not folklore," he said quietly. "They're habits. Things that keep you alive long enough to hate being alive." Before I could ask more, he started his snowmobile again. "You leaving already?" He didn't answer right away, just pulled his gloves tight and kicked the stand up. "I shouldn't have come back," he said finally. "This place, it don't forget." Then he revved the engine, turned, and rode off down the access road, fast, like the woods behind him might reach out and drag him back. I watched until the sound faded completely. The trees swallowed him, and the silence returned, thicker than before. I stood there for a long time, the cold creeping into my fingers, replaying what he'd said. Read it again. Real slow this time. When I went back inside, the paper with the rules was still sitting on the desk. Edges curled, type faded. I read the first line again. 1. Lock every door by sundown. The clock on the wall ticked once. The wind rattled the window pane, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I noticed it. A second set of boot prints beside mine, leading up to the porch. They were deeper than they should have been, and they didn't walk away. Up here, night doesn't fall the way it does anywhere else. It drifts in, slow, pale, reluctant. The sun hung over the horizon around 10, refusing to quit, smearing the sky in bruised orange until it finally gave up and sank behind the ridge. What was left wasn't darkness, just a strange, silver half-light that made everything look like it was underwater. I did what the rules said, locked every door, not because I believed it, not yet, but because the air felt off. The shadows inside the cabin stretched long across the floorboards, crawling up the walls like fingers. Outside, the wind started to pick up. You could hear it threading through the spruce needles, the occasional pop of ice shifting on the roof. Normal sounds. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was listening. I kept busy, cleaned my rifle, double-checked the generator, boiled some instant noodles. Anything to keep my hands moving. I even wrote my first entry in the logbook. Day 1, all secure. Temperature, 10 below. No sign of wildlife. That was it. Just the facts. No mention of the strange rules. By midnight, the cabin had gone quiet again. The kind of quiet that presses in on you, makes you aware of every heartbeat. I lay on the bunk with my coat zipped to my chin, listening to the crackle of the stove and the faint hum of the radio on the desk. Then, around 2:45 a.m., the static changed. At first it was just a hiss, like snow on a TV. But underneath it, something else. A rhythm. Slow. Like breathing caught between the frequencies. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, leaned closer. "Base, this is Tundra Point," I said into the mic. "Come again?" Nothing. Just that same wet, heavy static. I checked my watch, 2:58. The sound grew louder, filling the small room until it felt like it was crawling into my ears. The dials on the radio trembled, flickering between channels even though I wasn't touching them. And then, exactly 3 o'clock a.m., silence. Everything stopped. The static, the stove crackle, even the wind outside. Like the world hit pause. I held my breath for what felt like a full minute. Then, slowly, the normal sounds crept back in. The ticking of the wall clock, the faint whistle of the wind. I told myself it was coincidence. Radios glitch all the time out here. Moisture, temperature drop, frequency overlap. It happens. But deep down, I knew better. I'd worked this terrain long enough to recognize what nature sounds like. And whatever that was, it wasn't nature. Before lying back down, I caught sight of something through the frost-fogged window. At the edge of the clearing, where the snow met the trees, a shape moved. Tall, slow, almost human. Just a blur against the pale horizon. I blinked. It was gone. The wind picked up again, and I told myself it was a trick of the half-light. A branch, maybe. A moose. But when I turned the lamp off and tried to sleep, my gut kept whispering the same thing Hank had said earlier that day. Read the rules again. Real slow this time. And somewhere between waking and dreaming, I swore I heard the faint click of the front latch. The second night always tells you more than the first. By then, the forest starts to notice you. The temperature had dropped to 15 below, the kind of cold that feels alive, that crawls under your skin and settles in your bones. Even inside, the air bit at my lungs. Every breath came out as a puff of fog that hung for a second before fading. I spent most of the evening cataloging the snow depth markers and logging weather data by lantern light. Anything to stay awake. The woods outside were dead silent again. No owls, no wolves, not even the creak of branches. Just the faint hum of the generator, pulsing steady like a heartbeat. I shut it off before bed to save fuel. That's when the silence really set in. Deep and thick, like someone had stuffed the world with cotton. Around 1 o'clock a.m., I was drifting in and out of sleep when the first knock came. 3 sharp raps, slow, even. Knock, knock, knock. I opened my eyes, not sure at first if I'd dreamed it. The cabin was pitch black except for the dim glow of embers in the stove. I waited. Another few seconds passed. Then again. Knock, knock, knock. Front door. I sat up, heart thudding. Grabbed my flashlight with one hand, Colt revolver with the other. The steel was so cold it burned my fingers. "Who's there?" I called out. My voice sounded too loud, bouncing off the log walls. No answer. Just wind pressing faintly against the cabin siding. Then it came again. 3 knocks, but not from the front anymore. This time, the back door. I froze. You could have dropped a pin in that silence. I thought of the list on my desk, that single line I'd laughed at days before. Rule 2. If you hear someone knocking after midnight, don't answer. My instinct screamed to move, but the rule echoed louder in my head. I stayed still, breath shallow, finger tight on the trigger. The knocking stopped. For a few seconds, I thought whoever, or whatever, it was had left. Then came the sound of something heavy dragging across the porch boards. Slow, deliberate. It moved from one end of the cabin to the other like someone pacing or searching. The boards creaked under its weight. I could hear it right outside the window. And then, just as suddenly, silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels listening. I stayed awake the rest of the night, sitting against the wall with the revolver resting on my knee. The lantern burned low, flickering each time the wind hit the shutters. At some point, exhaustion won. I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes again, dawn light was seeping through the frost. Everything looked normal. The stove cold, the window fogged, the door still bolted. For a second, I almost convinced myself it had all been a dream. Then I stepped to the front door. There, in the thin snow on the porch, were boot prints. Big ones. Heavy tread. Water pooled inside each impression. They led from the front door to the back, and then off toward the trees. I followed them a few feet before stopping dead in my tracks. The prints just ended. Not faded, not covered. Just stopped, right at the edge of the tree line. And beyond that, nothing. No branches disturbed, no sign of a person or animal. Only untouched snow. I crouched down, tracing one of the prints with my glove. The edges weren't frozen yet. They were still wet. Whoever, or whatever, had been out here had vanished less than an hour ago. And when I looked closer, I noticed something else. Each boot print was pointing toward the cabin, not away. 2 nights passed after the knocking. I didn't sleep much. Not really. Every sound in the cabin became suspicious. The creak of the wood, the groan of the stove, even the sigh of the wind under the eaves. You start hearing things that aren't there when you're alone long enough. That's what I kept telling myself. But by the 3rd night, I knew better. The sky that evening was clear, painfully clear, the kind of cold that turns every star into a shard of glass. The moon hung low, bright enough to cast silver shadows across the snow. I'd been sitting on the porch steps, radio by my side, trying to catch a signal from base. Nothing but static again. Then I saw them. At first, I thought it was a trick of the eyes, the way snow reflects light when you stare too long into darkness. But no, these were real. Blue lights, drifting between the pines like lanterns being carried by invisible hands. They weren't headlights. They weren't flares. They floated too smooth, too slow, weaving between the trees with a kind of lazy grace that almost felt alive. I set the radio down and stood, squinting through the cold haze. There were maybe 6 or 7 of them, scattered deep in the forest, glowing faintly, each about the size of a fist. For a few seconds, I forgot to be afraid. They were beautiful, the kind of beauty that doesn't belong here, something too delicate for the wilderness. Then, one of them drifted closer. It moved silently across the snow, just at the edge of the tree line. Every few feet, it would pause, then pulse brighter, like it was breathing. I remember feeling an odd warmth on my face, not heat exactly, just the sensation of being watched back. That's when Hank's voice came to me, clear as if he were standing right beside me. "Never follow the lights." I froze mid-step. I hadn't even realized I'd been moving toward them. My boots were halfway off the porch, one hand still on the railing. The nearest light stopped, hanging still in the air. The glow dimmed, then brightened again, almost like it was waiting for me. I whispered, "What the hell are you?" And then I noticed it. The snow beneath the lights wasn't crunching under any weight. It was shifting, rising and falling, like the ground itself was breathing. For a moment, I thought it was wind, but the air was dead still. The trees weren't even swaying. The movement was coming from underneath. The snow would lift slightly, then sink, in a slow rhythm. That warmth I'd felt before turned cold, real cold. I stepped back onto the porch, one careful foot at a time, keeping my eyes on those floating orbs. The light closest to me pulsed once more, brighter this time, and the snow beneath it cracked open just a little, like something under the surface had stirred. That was enough for me. I shut the cabin door, bolted it, and turned off every lamp inside. Through the peephole, I could still see the faint glow through the trees. For nearly an hour, those lights drifted in slow circles around the clearing. I didn't blink, didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, just before dawn, they started to fade. One by one, they dimmed until only the pale blue outline of the snow remained. I waited another half hour before stepping outside. The air was sharp, still, and empty again. But where the lights had floated, the snow was melted in small, perfect circles, each one the same size. No tracks, no footprints, no sign of anything that should have made light, let alone heat. I radioed base that morning to ask about strange atmospheric phenomena, auroras, electrical discharges, anything. The line buzzed, and then a voice I didn't recognize came through. "Did you follow them?" I froze. "Follow what?" The voice crackled, then vanished. Just static. When I looked at the radio later that day, the power light was off. I hadn't even turned it on. Morning in Alaska can fool you. The light looks clean, safe, like the world hit reset overnight. But out here, That's just the forest's way of pretending. The night after the lights, I needed a reason to leave the cabin. Anything to get moving, to remind myself that I was still in control of my own nerves. So, I geared up, rifle, radio, snowmobile, and decided to do a standard wildlife patrol along the creek line. It was a quiet run, too quiet. Usually by late winter you'll see something. Fox tracks, ptarmigan, maybe a distant moose herd moving through the flats. That morning the snow looked untouched, smooth as marble. No sound but the hum of the engine, and the occasional groan of ice shifting under the creek bed. Around mile 4, I killed the throttle and coasted to a stop. The trees thinned out there, opening into a wide stretch of frozen water framed by black spruce. Sunlight caught the ice, blinding for a second. When my eyes adjusted, that's when I saw it. A moose. It stood about 50 yards ahead, near the creek's bend, but something about it was wrong. Even from a distance, I could tell. It wasn't moving, not grazing, not breathing, just standing. I lifted my binoculars. Its legs were too long. Not by much, but enough for the proportions to feel off. The joints bent the wrong way, slightly backward at the knees, like it had been built by someone who'd seen a moose once and tried to recreate it from memory. Its fur looked normal at first, brown, matted with frost. But when the wind shifted, the hairs rippled in different directions, like they didn't belong to the same hide. I lowered the binoculars, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. Now it was closer. I hadn't heard it move, not a sound. I raised the rifle out of instinct, not to shoot, just to feel less helpless. My thumb found the safety. My finger hovered near the trigger guard. "Easy there," I muttered under my breath. "Don't do anything stupid." Then it moved, not like an animal, not like anything that walks on legs. Its head turned, slowly, then kept turning, 90 degrees, 100, 120, until the antlers faced the opposite direction and the rest of the body stayed perfectly still. And then, it stared right at me. Through the scope, I saw its eyes, black, glassy, too wide, like they'd been painted on. No blink, no reflection. I fired a single warning shot into the air. The echo rolled across the valley, sharp and clean. Normally, a moose would bolt at that, even the big bulls. This one didn't. It just tilted its head. The jaw moved in a slow, awkward motion. At first, I thought it was snarling. Then I realized it was smiling. The mouth stretched too wide, skin pulling tight until I could see the edges split, raw and red. A grin, too human, too deliberate, cut across its muzzle. And then it was gone. Not ran, not turned, just gone. One blink, and the spot where it had stood was empty. No tracks, no sound, nothing. The only thing left was the faint fog of its breath, hanging in the air, fading. I stood there for a long minute, rifle raised, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. Finally, I backed up to the snowmobile and turned the ignition. The engine sputtered twice before catching. I kept glancing at the tree line, expecting to see that shape again, waiting for that grin to reappear between the trees. But the woods stayed still. When I made it back to the cabin, I logged the sighting out of habit. Moose, large male, sighted near Creek Bend. Behavior abnormal. No tracks. I almost wrote more, about the way it moved, the way it smiled, but stopped. Because that would have meant admitting it happened. That night I kept the rifle by my bed. Every time the wind brushed against the walls, I swore I heard the faint scrape of hooves on ice. Slow, circling, and I couldn't stop thinking about Rule 6. The moose aren't always moose. I'd laughed at that rule when I first read it, but now I found myself whispering it under my breath like a prayer. When the sun started to sink behind the ridges that night, the cold returned sharper than ever, cold that stings your teeth when you breathe. I'd spent the afternoon double-checking the generator and logging snow depth, trying to convince myself that what I'd seen by the creek had been fatigue. But as soon as the light bled out of the sky, the forest went quiet again. No wind, no birds. Just that hollow stillness that presses against the cabin walls until it feels like the silence itself has weight. I remember stepping out for one last look before locking up. My flashlight beam cut across the snow, throwing long shadows from the porch rails. That's when I saw them. Footprints. They circled the cabin. Once, then twice. Big impressions. Human-shaped, but wrong. The toes ended in deep gouges, like claws had dragged through the snow. I followed the line a few steps before my brain caught up with my body. Whatever had made them had walked in a perfect circle around my cabin. Deliberate, slow, patient. I backed toward the door, pulse pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my ears. I slammed the latch and killed the lantern, letting the darkness swallow the room. For a few seconds, nothing moved. Then, somewhere outside, the snow crunched again. Just one step, then another. Whoever it was, they were close. I grabbed my gear bag, the Colt, and my car keys. The outpost was 10 miles east. Rough terrain, but I knew the trail. I wasn't planning on spending another night in that cabin. When I swung open the door, the cold hit me like a slap. My truck sat at the edge of the clearing, half covered in frost. I ran for it, boots sinking deep into the snow. The air was so still I could hear my own breathing. I yanked the door open, climbed in, turned the key. Nothing. Just the dull click of a dead starter. I tried again, same thing, then again. The engine didn't even cough. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel, breath clouding the windshield. Come on, come on. Then, through the glass, I saw movement in the rearview mirror. Something tall standing at the tree line, motionless, watching. I couldn't make out its shape entirely, only the faint gleam of eyes catching the moonlight. Too high off the ground to be human. Too still to be animal. I reached for the radio on the passenger's seat, flicked it on and prayed for a signal. Static hissed through the speaker, rising and falling like breath. 2:59 a.m., and then, at exactly 3 o'clock a.m., the static stopped. For one heartbeat, there was nothing but silence. Then a whisper, so close it felt like it came from inside the cab with me. Stay inside. Low, calm, almost human. The radio went dead again. I looked up. The thing by the trees was gone. I didn't move for the rest of the night. I just sat there in the cab, hand tight around the revolver, headlights off, waiting for dawn to break. When it finally did, the world looked clean again. Bright snow, empty forest, no sign of anything. But when I stepped out, I noticed new prints around the truck. Same shape as before, same claws. Only this time, they didn't circle. They stopped right at my door. Morning up here comes hard and honest. It doesn't sneak in. It breaks the night open. The sky was the color of old steel when I stepped onto the porch. Breath fogged out of me in quick, sharp puffs. The stove had burned down to coals overnight, and the cabin felt colder than I remembered. Something about the air made my teeth ache. That's when I saw it, a silhouette against the threshold, small and dark. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, a trick of the low light. Then I bent down and realized it wasn't a shadow at all. A raven lay on its side on the porch, wings folded awkwardly beneath it. Feathers glinted with frost. One eye, glossy and black, stared up at me as if waiting for a question. Its beak was open in a fixed, impossible way. When I leaned in, the sound hit me. Not a caw, not a rattle. A soft hiss, like someone speaking right beside my ear. The bird's throat moved minutely, and I heard it, clear as the wind through the eaves. Miller? My name, breathed out in a voice that didn't belong to a bird. Low, wet, intimate. It crawled under my skin. For a second, I stood frozen. Rangers learned to read the land, to know tracks from prints, and to tell a wolf howl from a coyote's yip. You learn what is normal and what is not. A talking raven is not normal. I could have backed away, left it for the sun to do its work. Protocol, in any other situation, would have been to log it, photograph it, take a sample, maybe call dispatch, for evidence, for the record. But then I saw something else. The feathers at the base of its neck were split, as if something had tried to push itself out from inside the bird. Tiny black threads, like hair, were tangled through the plumage, and from the beak came that whispering, a string of syllables that slid together and always ended on my name. Rule 8 sat in my mind like a pebble in a boot. Burn anything that whispers. Hank's voice had been blunt when he wrote it. No metaphors, no room for debate. Burn it. Don't debate the ethics of a dead bird. Don't prove anything to anyone. Burn it. I remember the way my hands moved because they were acting faster than my head. I grabbed the kerosene can from where I kept it by the stove for lamp oil. The metal felt cold and steady in my grasp. I poured the liquid slowly, a thin ribbon over the raven, and the smell hit me right away. Sharp and chemical, but undercut with that old forest scent, like seep and wet earth. It felt obscene. Setting fuel on something that had been animate moments before, but the whisper in the bird's throat made the decision for me. I struck a match. The sulfur flare stung my nose. I held it to the feathers. The flame caught with a whisper, then a roar. The raven's body flared up, black wings folding inward as the heat took them. For an instant, the bird's open beak seemed to gape wider, and the hiss turned into a wet, human-sounding gasp. I felt my stomach flip. I watched the feathers blacken, curl, then fall away in sparks that smelled like burned hair and pine pitch. The smoke was immediate and thick, climbing into the gray morning sky in a greasy, sweet plume. It smelled wrong in a way that made the back of my throat ache. Not just burnt feather, but a sweetness underneath it, like tar and old fruit, rotten and sticky. I coughed, hand to my mouth, and the sound of it seemed absurdly loud in that small space. As the raven turned to ash, the whispering stopped. Silence hit so hard I could hear the generator out by the fuel tank ticking over. No voices, no rustling from the tree line. The only sound was the crackle of whatever remained in the blackened pile on the porch. I took the remaining embers and crushed them under my boot, making sure nothing would flare up when the wind changed. Out here, embers are dangerous in more ways than one. You don't leave them smoldering. You bury them. You drown them in snow. You make sure they're gone. When I brushed the ash from the porch, something clung to my glove, a thin, black thread, like the hair I'd seen tangled in the raven's feathers. It stuck to my fingers, cold and oily. I pulled it free and watched it curl into the snow at my feet, sinking like a tiny black seed. For the rest of the morning I kept glancing at that spot, half expecting the snow to billow like breath, and something to rise from it. Nothing did. The horizon stayed as it was, pale, unbroken. But my hands didn't stop shaking for hours. I cleaned the porch, logged the incident in the notebook with the steady hand of someone trying to pretend they were writing a field note instead of a diary. Dead raven on porch. Feathers charred. Voice reported. Bird burned per Rule 8. Sample collected. None. I left out the part about my name, because that's the kind of thing that makes people think you're losing it. Part of me hated myself for not taking a tissue sample, for not doing the professional thing. The other part, the part that has watched men come back from woods after 3 days with their minds sliced open by whatever lived beyond the trail, obeyed the rule because obedience felt like safety. Burn first, ask questions later. A practical maxim dressed up in fear. When I finally stepped back inside and slammed the door, the cabin felt smaller than it had before, like the walls were leaning in to listen. The smell of smoke clung to the curtains and the log walls for the rest of the day, a reminder that some things leave a mark even when they disappear. Before I tucked the logbook into the drawer, I read Rule 8 one more time, I said it aloud, not sure if I was saying it like a mantra or a warning. Burn anything that whispers. The words tasted like ash. I could feel them in my mouth all afternoon. And later, when the sun slid low and the blue light came back across the snow, I found myself staring at the window, half expecting to see a shape step out of the trees and begin to whisper again. I didn't hear my name again that day, but I did hear something else, the soft, distant sound of wings beating very slowly, somewhere beyond the tree line, like a clock being wound in a room I couldn't see. Evening came earlier than usual, heavy with fog that drifted low across the clearing. It rolled between the trees like smoke, swallowing the horizon inch by inch until the cabin felt cut off from the rest of the world. The air smelled different too, damp, metallic, like snow about to fall. I had spent most of the day sitting near the stove, trying to stay warm, listening for sounds I hoped wouldn't come. The forest had been silent again since morning. No wind, no movement, no ravens. When the knock came, I almost dropped my mug. 3 times. Sharp, deliberate. Only this time, it was still daylight, just past sundown. I froze halfway between the table and the door. The sound had weight to it. Not like knuckles against wood, more like something heavy striking the wall, muffled by skin. Then came the voice. "Open up, Miller. It's just me." Hank. My pulse jumped hard. Relief hit first, the kind that comes when you think another human's finally there to make sense of everything. Then, confusion followed right behind it. Hank had left 3 days ago. I'd watched him ride off down the access road until his snowmobile vanished into the trees. I stepped to the window and wiped a circle clear in the frost. The fading light outside caught the shape of a truck idling at the far end of the drive. The paint looked familiar, old Forest Service green, but the headlights were off. The windshield was dark. Still, the voice came again. "Come on, kid. Open up." It sounded right. Same gravel tone, same rhythm. Only, it was wrong somehow. Off by a breath, like an echo played through bad speakers. I called out, "Hank, that you?" No answer at first. Then, "Yeah, it's me. Forgot to tell you something." He sounded closer now, right outside the door. Every instinct I had told me to open it, to believe what I was hearing. But another part of me, something deeper, older, remembered how he'd looked the last time I saw him, pale, eyes darting toward the woods, saying he shouldn't have come back. I kept one hand on the revolver at my side. "What did you forget?" I asked. The voice paused. The silence stretched too long. Then, softer, "Just open the door, Miller." That's when I noticed something. The air wasn't fogging near the window anymore. No warmth, no breath. Whoever was out there wasn't breathing. I backed away from the door slowly. My boot creaked against the floorboard. The sound made the knocking stop. Then the voice came again, quieter, slower. "Open up." Another pause. "Please." But it didn't sound like a plea anymore. It sounded like something learning how to speak, words dragging themselves across a throat that didn't belong to them. I wanted to turn on the light. I wanted to believe Hank was out there, lost or freezing, waiting for help. But Rule 2 burned through my head like fire. If you hear someone knocking after midnight, don't answer. It wasn't midnight yet, but the rule didn't say what to do before, so I waited. The voice came again, softer still, so soft it almost blended with the wind. "Open up. It's cold." And then, it wasn't words anymore, just a wet, broken sound, like someone trying to imitate speech through water. A gurgle that ended in a breath that didn't sound human. The cabin walls creaked once. Then silence. I stood there, staring at the door until the light outside faded completely. When I finally found the courage to look through the window again, the truck at the end of the drive was gone. Not driven off. Gone. No tire tracks in the snow. Only the porch remained, the board slick with something dark, frozen in streaks that led straight up to the door. And from somewhere deep in the forest, a voice that sounded almost, but not quite, like Hanks whispered my name once more before the night swallowed it whole. That night, the wind returned. It came in from the east, scraping through the trees like sandpaper over bark, moaning through the chimney flue. I tried to focus on the fire, the hiss and pop of sap bursting in the wood, but every sound seemed to echo too long, too sharp. The cabin walls felt thinner than they had before, like they were holding their breath. I had just started writing in the logbook when I heard it, soft at first, barely audible under the crackle of the stove. Crying. A woman's voice, faint, trembling, carried by the wind from somewhere just beyond the porch. "Please," she whispered. "Please, let me in." My pen froze mid-stroke. I listened hard, every hair on my arm standing on end. The crying came again, clearer this time, closer. It didn't sound like an animal, and it wasn't the eerie groan of shifting wood. It was unmistakably human. The kind of sobbing that comes from the gut, raw and desperate. I stood, heart thudding, and reached for my coat. Every ranger instinct screamed help. Out here, compassion isn't optional. It's protocol. When someone's trapped in these woods at night, you open the door first and ask questions later. I was halfway across the room when I saw the paper tacked above the desk. The list of rules. Rule 9. Never, ever look in the window when you hear crying. The words hit like a slap. I stopped cold. The fire cracked behind me, throwing red light across the walls. The crying outside grew louder, now mixed with coughing and shivering breaths. "Please, it's so cold. I'm hurt." My hand hovered over the latch. Every piece of logic in my head argued that someone could be freezing to death just a few feet away. But there was something in the voice, something rehearsed about the rhythm, like it was pretending to be weak. I whispered through the door, "Who's out there?" The crying stopped. Silence. Then a new sound. Slow footsteps crunching across the snow, circling toward the window nearest the stove. The crying began again, softer now, closer, right outside the glass. "Please, just let me in. I won't make it through the night." I backed away, rifle in hand, eyes locked on the window. The lamplight reflected faintly off the frost. I could see my own breath fogging the air. Then the tone changed. The voice stopped pleading and started blaming. "You're cruel," it said, still sobbing. "You hear me and do nothing. You'll let me die out here." Each word came sharper, angrier, until the sobs twisted into something else entirely. Laughter. Not the laughter of relief or madness, but something that crawled out from the bottom of a throat. A wet, choking cackle that rose higher and higher until it didn't sound human anymore. I wanted to look. Every nerve in me demanded to see what was there, just to prove it was a trick of wind and echo. But the rule burned in my mind like a commandment. Never look. I turned my back to the window, staring into the dark corner of the cabin, hands trembling so hard the rifle rattled. The laughter outside went quiet. For a few seconds, there was only the ticking of the wall clock. Then, tap. A single, light tap on the glass behind me. Another, tap, tap. I couldn't take it anymore. I spun around and looked. The window pane wasn't reflecting firelight anymore. It was bulging inward. The glass stretched like soft plastic, bowing toward me in a perfect circle, as if something on the other side were pressing its face against it. Through the frost, I could make out the vaguest shapes, eye sockets, a mouth moving far too wide. But there was no face, just shifting dark pressed close enough to strain the glass to cracking. Then, as fast as it began, it pulled away. The window snapped back with a sound like a gasp. The frost pattern on the glass changed, thin lines spiraling outward from the center, forming what looked like a handprint. Except the fingers were too long, and there were too many of them. I stood there until sunrise, the rifle trained on that window. I didn't sleep, didn't move. When morning came, the frost had melted. The glass was clean. No cracks, no marks, no handprints. But when I leaned close, I noticed something carved faintly into the wood frame beneath it. Letters scratched by something sharp. Just 3 words. You looked anyway. By dawn, the noises stopped. No crying, no laughter, not even wind. The forest had gone hollow and still. That heavy, unnatural silence that comes after something's fed and left. The light crept in slow through the window, gray and flat, falling across the cabin floor like ash. I sat there for a while, staring at the last ember in the stove, the rifle heavy across my lap. I couldn't tell if the stillness was a relief or a warning. Outside, the snow lay untouched again, smooth as if the night had never happened. The porch boards were clean. Even the frost on the window had refrozen into perfect, delicate patterns, nothing to suggest the face I'd seen pressing from the other side. But I knew better. You can't scrub away what that kind of cold does to your bones. I moved through the cabin like a man erasing himself, dousing the fire, closing the shutters, packing what little I'd brought. My notebook, my revolver, the strange envelope with the 9 rules folded inside. I slipped that into my breast pocket without thinking. When I opened the door, the air outside hit like a blade. The snow was hard-packed, glinting under the weak morning sun. The forest stretched wide and dead quiet. Even the ravens were gone. I stood on the porch for a long moment, scanning the tree line. It was too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you wonder what's listening. Then I did what I swore I'd never do. I left the post without clearance. The hike to the access road was supposed to take an hour. It felt longer. Every step crunched like thunder in that suffocating silence. I kept my rifle slung low, eyes flicking from shadow to shadow. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't walking out alone. Once I reached the road, I dropped my pack and keyed the radio. The static came alive instantly, crackling sharp in the cold air. "This is Ranger Miller, Tundra Point Station," I said, voice shaking more than I wanted it to. "Requesting immediate pickup and reassignment." Over. There was a pause. Just static and wind. Then a voice came through. Calm, professional. "Copy that. Ranger ID number, please." I gave it. Waited. The line went dead silent for 5 full seconds. Then the voice returned. Slower now. "Sir, could you repeat that number?" I did. Another pause. "Sir," she said finally, "Ranger Collins has been retired for 5 years. That station's been unmanned since 2018. My stomach dropped. "Say again?" But the radio only hissed. No voice, no static, nothing. I sat there in the snow, staring at the handset, my breath fogging the frozen air. My mind raced. Collins. The logbook I'd been updating had the same last name scribbled across every page, the same handwriting on the note, the same rules. For a long time I didn't move, just sat there, listening. Then I heard it. That sound, faint, distant, dragging across wood. Slow, deliberate. It was coming from behind me, from the direction of the cabin. I turned the radio off, shouldered my pack, and started walking. Every instinct screamed to look back, just once, to prove I wasn't being followed. But some part of me, the part that had learned to obey the rules without question, kept my eyes fixed forward. I didn't look back. I kept walking until the wind returned, carrying the faintest echo of a voice I'd heard before, old, tired, and too close. "Read them again, kid. Real slow this time." And even though I never saw the cabin again, I knew the sound behind me wasn't the wind through the trees. It was something dragging itself closer, one slow scrape at a time. Rule I'll never forget. If you ever find a list of rules in a place no one should be living, don't laugh, don't stay, and whatever you do, don't look back. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video if you dare.